Welcome everyone to Energy Update Ohio. I'm Vanessa Lynch, the Pennsylvania field organizer for Moms Clean Air Force. Moms Clean Air Force is a community of over 1 million moms and dads nationwide, united against air pollution to protect our children's health. 1 year ago, the passage of House Bill 6 dealt a massive blow to clean energy investment and innovation in Ohio. This $1.5 billion consumer-funded bailout for First Energy Solutions, 2 failing nuclear plants in Ohio, as well as the 2 of the region's dirtiest coal plants, also gutted the state's renewable energy and efficiency programs. First Energy Solutions could potentially receive over $1.5 billion in ratepayer money over the life of the legislation. Today, the legislation is back at the forefront of policy news. Following a lengthy FBI investigation, it's now known that House Bill 6 was pushed through the legislature and became law as a result of, as a U.S. attorney described it, the largest bribery money laundering scheme ever perpetrated against the people in the state of Ohio. Advocates in Ohio have already launched a full-scale repeal effort for House Bill 6 and are working to develop a comprehensive, consumer-focused energy policy to replace the legislation and move Ohio forward. Moms Clean Air Force is in the middle of these efforts in Ohio. Joining me today is Tracy Sabetta, our Moms consultant in Ohio. Tracy's the founding partner of Initiative Consulting, a government relations and communications firm in Columbus. Tracy's been with Moms in a variety of capacities since 2011 and currently serves on the leadership team of the Ohio Energy Table, the statewide energy advocacy coalition. So Tracy, tell us more about the passage of House Bill 6 last year and what the bill would do if fully implemented.
Sure. Well, thanks, Vanessa, for taking some time to talk about Ohio and the mess that we seem to be in at this point in time. Just by a little way of context, bills like this had been introduced in Ohio for the past 3 general assemblies. Some were to bail out the nuclear power plant, some were to bail out coal-fired power plants in Ohio, but this one was different. This one was being pushed through by the newly elected Speaker of the House, Larry Householder. And we knew that he, always worked with a strong fist, did a lot of arm twisting to get bills passed. And this particular bill not only put a charge on consumers' bill every month to the tune, as you mentioned, of $1.5 billion, but it also gutted Ohio's renewable energy and energy efficiency standards. And that was something that was different in this bill than we had seen in any of the other varieties. In Ohio, we have a Republican governor and Republican supermajorities in both houses. However, when this bill passed last year, there weren't even enough votes for it within the Republican caucus to pass it with just Republican votes alone. So we saw labor get very involved in this effort. They were interested in protecting jobs and keeping the nuclear power plants open. So because of the influence that was exerted by them, as well as I mentioned some of the arm twisting from Speaker Householder, 10 Democrats also offered their votes in the House to make sure that this bill had passed. We fought a very hard-fought battle with the lobbying efforts, grassroots communications efforts going on too, but it just never quite seemed like it was enough. The proponents of the bill did talk a lot about preserving those jobs and the cost of renewable energy and efficiency standards, but they never talked about the savings that came with those things. It was a very one-sided message from them, and it worked in the passage of this bill. The bill was introduced early in 2019 and didn't actually pass through the final concurrence vote until July of 2020. I'm sorry, to July of 2019.
So what was the reaction of House Bill 6 opponents to the passage of this bill?
There were a lot of accountability efforts early on with some of the members who had voted for the bill. Our partners ran radio ads. There were direct mail pieces that were distributed as well. But probably the biggest reaction was representatives of the oil and gas industry, as well as some of our environmental partners, filed paperwork very quickly after the governor signed this bill to try to put House Bill 6 on the November 2020 ballot. We were hoping for a full repeal through referendum. This was when we really started to know that something was different this time around, that something was going on. We saw the creation of a dark money group called Generation Now. and the amount of money that was being spent by Generation Now on direct mail pieces, on TV ads that just ran constantly. And these ads had a very xenophobic message. They talked about don't let people who knock on your door have your personal information if they had come to collect a petition signature, because they were going to be sending the information straight to the Chinese government, and that the Chinese wanted to take over our power grid. Don't let them. Some of the ads showed very shadowy figures standing outside your door as though the petition circulators were dangerous. We filed cease and desist letters. There were lawsuits filed because we have a lot of partners in Ohio who canvass for fundraising, who canvass for their advocacy efforts, and no one was answering the door anymore because of this multi-million-dollar ad campaign, basically saying if somebody came to your door with a clipboard, they were there for a nefarious purpose. So it was very difficult to get these signatures collected. And then once the signature process did start, however, we started to see the emergence of something called blockers. And blockers were people who would identify where our petition signature collectors were going to be for a day, and they would come and stand physically in front of them and not let you approach them to collect a signature. They would try to tell you again that they were working for the Chinese government and that you didn't want to give them your personal information. And if nothing else, it confused people and scared them enough that they didn't even want to know more about what was happening, so they would walk away. As if that weren't enough, they then decided to print their own petitions, which were not tied to a Secretary of State's office. And these were not actual petitions. They were just pieces of paper, and saying if you wanted to put House Bill 6 on the ballot to sign, theirs. And therefore, the people thought they were offering a petition signature. They were not. They were just signing a piece of paper that came off of a printer. And then the final blow came when there were bribes offered to signature collectors. We will give you $2,500 and a plane ticket anywhere in the United States if you give us your signed petitions and walk away. There was some evidence of this through text messages. We had video and audio recordings of this happening, and we sent them to the Attorney General's office, but nothing was really happening with this. Signature collection firms were being contacted by First Energy and by Generation Now representatives, hiring some of the best signature collection firms in the country so that they would be conflicted and couldn't collect signatures from us. I mean, it was precedent setting. I've been involved in several campaigns over the years to put issues on the ballot, and I have never seen anything like this. At the end of the day, after all of these efforts were put into place, there was no way that we could collect the signatures necessary to put this on the ballot. You only have 90 days after the passage of a bill in Ohio. And it took about 30 to 40 days for the Secretary of State to approve our ballot language, so we were cut down even shorter. And then you throw in all of the blocking measures that were put in place, and there was no way. So at that point in time, House Bill 6 was going to be the law of the land. There was no way for us to repeal it. There was not going to be a referendum. And we started looking at other options in Ohio. We started looking at local issues and local policy, but we thought that was going to be it in Ohio for state policy for quite some time.
Sounds like the news of the FBI investigations changed the landscape for energy advocacy in Ohio. What's happening now?
Well, it most certainly has. When we all went to bed on July 20th, we never thought on July 21st when we woke up that this is what we would be dealing with. The news broke early that morning that former now Speaker Larry Householder had been arrested, his farm had been raided for documents, and that 4 of his closest allies had also been charged in this scandal. As you mentioned, just to give a little bit more depth on that, this was a 2.5-year undercover FBI investigation. It started when Speaker Householder flew on a First Energy private jet to President Trump's inauguration. And what we now know from the FBI affidavits and from some wiretaps that were being conducted, that's when the conversation first started about, they needed to have this bill passed. Speaker Householder wanted to help make sure that this bill passed. So First Energy began funneling money back in 2017 to this Generation Now and to several other dark money accounts so that Speaker Householder, we wasn't Speaker at the time, but that Larry Householder could then begin identifying candidates, primary candidates around the state that would support him in becoming Speaker. So this was something that was really designed to build power in addition to personal gain from the $61 million in bribes. So once this all came to light and conversations started about the fact that we needed to repeal House Bill 6, this was not something that could stay. You could not have a bill that was bought and paid for by First Energy and rewarded that same corporation with $1.5 billion in funds from Ohio consumers. That could not be allowed to stand. So the legislature did remove Larry Householder as Speaker. Representative Bob Cupp, who had been, he's been a representative, he's been a state senator, he served on the Supreme Court of Ohio for years and is now back in the Ohio House, was elected as the new Speaker of the House. So we found out this morning that there will be a select committee developed. No chairs or members have been named yet, but that all of the efforts in the House to repeal House Bill 6 will go through this select committee. On the other hand, in the state Senate, you have a Senate president who is committed to a full repeal of this bill. We had hoped that that could happen as early as tomorrow. It may be tomorrow or Wednesday, where we actually see a Tuesday or Wednesday, where we see a full repeal of the bill in the Senate, but still no real determination of what we'll see in the House. So our coalition, which is a very broad-based and diverse coalition of conservation and environmental advocates, faith community, some labor partners, businesses, it's just a very, very large group of people have come together to collaborate on this effort. We've already launched a campaign. We have a website, which is repealhb6.com, where we are encouraging people to send a letter to their lawmakers saying that they would like to see them repeal the bill immediately, a full repeal. Been some discussions that they would repeal the bill prior to the election, but that the effective date of the repeal wouldn't be until January 1st, which opens up a whole new can of worms. We're calling it a fake repeal, essentially, because you can't tell your constituents you're repealing this bill that was passed through bribery and corruption and then delay the effective date until next year when you can just come back and implement a very similar policy. So what we're really hoping, once we get through this repeal effort, is that we can really start looking at a comprehensive energy bill. We've done some polling to see what it is that Ohioans would like to see, and they are interested in some real equitable climate solutions and energy policies. They want to make sure that everyone in Ohio is saving money on their energy bills. They want to make sure that we are not closing the door to economic development and job creation in Ohio by saying that we're not interested in renewables and we're not interested in energy efficiency. But I'm very pleased to say that making sure that these energy policies are done through an equity lens, and we'll make sure that those who are in a socioeconomic area, lower socioeconomic area of Ohio, or who have been disproportionately impacted by climate change over the years won't be left out. And that is something that has never really been at the forefront for Ohio. So I was very, very pleased to see that there is tremendous public support for doing some sort of policy like that.
What was it like advocating for environmental issues while such powerful behind-the-scenes forces were at work?
Well, we've been fighting, as I know you have in Pennsylvania, we've been fighting big utilities and investor-owned utilities for years. And so we know that it's a big money pay-to-play kind of tactic, but this one is different. We just knew that there was too much money flowing in and that people weren't willing to meet with us. People weren't listening to our messages. And just the fact that, they switched the messaging to this was the Chinese trying to take over our power grid. I mean, this was different from day one. We knew that things were not right. Reporters had started to dig in. There was actually even a time right before the last concurrence vote where we caught wind that at that time Speaker Householder was chartering the state jet to fly to Chicago to pick up members of his caucus who he knew would vote yes on this bill and bring just the yes votes back to Ohio for this session date so that he could make sure that the bill passed. And this would all have been done on the state dime. So that ended up not happening because the reporter did expose it prior to the jet taking off. But I think it was really working closely with members of the media who were asking the right questions and finding the right discrepancies made a big difference. What we didn't know, though, was that a lot of this was happening, this investigation was happening behind the scenes. There were FBI agents, 2 of them, who were involved in the investigation. There were members of the legislature who have not yet been identified, but in reading through the FBI affidavit, their name is legislator 1, 2, 3, had started to say things are not right. There are some primary candidates who are incredibly well funded by these organizations that nobody had heard of. They had started incorporating some of these dark money groups in Delaware, where you don't have to disclose the donors that put money into these accounts. So things were being done very quietly and very covertly, and that was different as well. One of the things, though, that I thought was really interesting is there was a gentleman who had been involved in our signature collection effort for the referendum. He was the Central Ohio Regional Manager to collect signatures on these petitions. And we didn't know this at the time, but during that effort, he had been contacted by one of the 4 allies of Speaker Householder, who has since been indicted, and offered $15,000 check for giving information to First Energy and its allies as to where signatures were going to be collected, what time signature collectors would be there, so that they could make sure that they were blocking these efforts. And at first, he was very strongly against it and said, no, thank you. Gave it some thought and ended up, through a friend, contacting the police and eventually the FBI, at which point they told him that they had been conducting this 2-year-long investigation and asked him if he would consider accepting and depositing the check and wearing a wire for future conversations. And I mean, these were the men who offered the signature collector money were long-term friends of his. They had worked with him on many campaigns. They trusted him, he trusted them, and then they came to him with this ask. And he decided that for the greater good, he would participate in the FBI investigation and did wear a wire for all future communications with them. And in large part, it was the activities that he chose to participate in with the FBI investigation that helped to bring this to a close. So a lot of this was going on unbeknownst to us. All of this was happening unbeknownst to us during the referendum campaign. But it was just, I hate to say this one was just different, but while there had been a lot of pay-to-play campaigns in Ohio in the past, and we knew that the utilities had undue influence over the Ohio legislature, we never had any idea that this was happening to the extent that it was.
So what would you warn others to look for or consider as warning signs for the kind of illegal activities that went on in Ohio?
Well, looking back now, I think that we probably saw some of the signs in that there were so many dark money organizations being formed. Some of them we knew about, but most of them we did not. And so, the money that was being spent, especially by the one that was public facing, was definitely more than we had ever seen. I would advise anyone who's in the middle of a campaign where you start to see television ads, radio ads, direct mail that seems excessive in amount, you can find out a lot of times through media purchasers how much money is being spent on these ads. And so that can help you to track, the kind of money that's being put into it. But I would say watch for empire building, which was what was happening here, in that, you had the speaker handpicking primary candidates to run against his own incumbents to make sure that he would be elected Speaker of the House and can do the bidding of First Energy in this case. I mean, that was really what this was about. While the people who've been charged did profit personally from the activities, they profited more from building that stranglehold of power over the legislature by knowing that there were now people who were beholden to the speaker and they were going to do what it was that he asked them to do. So I would just say, if legislation benefits one company or benefits one generation source, there's probably a reason for it, and you'll know when it feels different.
Thank you so much for sharing this story of Ohio and all of the work that you've been doing there. I know I really appreciate your hard work. I'm sure the people in Ohio do too. Do you have any last things that you would want to say or that you would want people to know about the repeal process or some of the actions people can take to get involved in Ohio?
Sure. I would say, first off, I want to give a lot of credit, though, to the coalition that had come together to fight the passage of House Bill 6 to start with. This was probably the best organized and best structured coalition that we had ever worked with. And, you know, people expected this bill to pass within a matter of weeks, and it took months. In fact, they had to extend the legislative session by a month and a half because they just simply did not have the votes. So I think that that is a real credit to, you know, the work done by the coalition through its lobbying, grassroots, and communications efforts, as well as the work done in conjunction with some investigative reporters who really asked the right questions because they saw that this one was different as well and didn't let it go. So, you know, building relationships with members of the media, I think, is always important just to convey our message, but it can also be really important to make sure that people are asking the right questions to the right people. Now, I will say if anybody is interested in learning more or participating in the repeal efforts, the best way to do that right now is through the coalition website at repealhb6.com. And there you will find all of the talking points that you need. You can directly send a letter to your member of the legislature. It will identify that member for you, both the House and Senate, as well as the Senate President and the new Speaker of the House to let them know that you would like to see this bill repealed immediately and replaced with something that really is more consumer focused and not so energy company focused. That's been the trend in Ohio and in many states for a long time, and the time has come to stop that. And given this tremendous opportunity that we have to really have a conversation about what an equitable energy solution for Ohio should look like is not something that we can squander.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining Energy Update Ohio with Moms Clean Air Forces, myself, Vanessa Lynch, and Tracy Sabetta, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you.